This is a story of how a pair of vet students committed the biggest crime in Mexico's history. It was December night in 1995. Carlos carefully lifted the figure of baby Jesus and placed it in the nativity presentation. He had done that every year since he was young. It was something Mexican families did all the time. They had a big dinner, and then at midnight, all the children of the house gathered and placed baby Jesus on the crib. It was a cherished moment that his mother insisted upon, even though Carlos and his siblings now were adults. He hurried to grab a jacket. Getting out of the house wouldn't be easy. The whole family still wanted to party, and his mother called out, "Where are you going at this hour? We still need to eat the cake." Carlos managed to explain himself. He grabbed his keys and quickly got out. He still had to pick Ramon up from his house. At 1 in the morning, Carlos and Ramon jumped over the 2-meter fence that surrounded the Museum of Anthropology in the center of Mexico City. There was no security in sight, just as they expected. They hurried towards the basement and got into one of the AC ducts. They crawled inside. It was dusty and too cold, even though it was December. The Asian exhibitions were at the base of the beautiful building. Then on the first floor you could find the African exhibitions, but Carlos and Ramon had their eye only on the second floor, so they kept on climbing through the tight space. Carlos knew it was their only chance, because while they were sneaking into the museum, the 8 guards that were supposed to be patrolling were gathered in a watch post, having dinner and drinking alcohol. They usually worked well, but no one had given them problems these last few months. Besides, it was Christmas Eve, a blessed night as they call it. Criminals also had to take a break. When Carlos and Ramon finally got to the Mayan exhibition, their hearts raced. They had been in that same place every weekend for the past 6 months, but now it was all theirs. They had prepared well. They spied on the guards, learned their schedules, took notes of their habits and possible weaknesses, chose the objects they wanted, the most precious ones, the smallest ones, easy to get out. Ramon pulled a glass cutter out of his bag, and the pair of vet students started to fill the suitcases and bags. For 3 hours, they carefully pulled the relics out and into their bags. The guards were supposed to be patrolling the exhibitions every 2 hours at night, but it would be until the next morning when they realized that the treasures were gone. The only reason they stopped and did the round at 7:30 a.m. was because the next shift was supposed to start at 8. It was the guards from the next shift who forced them to report the robbery. But law enforcement also seemed to have partied the night before, because it took them 4 hours to show up. After seeing the severity of the crime with their own eyes, police and the director of the museum decided to close off the premises. No one got in and no one got out. But by that time, Carlos and Ramon had been at Carlos's parents' house for more than 7 hours. Closing streets and borders and airports was of no use. The most precious art of Mexico's history was well hidden in Carlos's closet. They had stolen treasures from the Palenque temple and the sacred cenote of Chichen Itza. The most remarkable of all was the mask of the bat god from the Zapotecan culture. If sold, even the least valuable relic could fetch them $20 million. Both Carlos and Ramon studied veterinary at the most prestigious university of Mexico. It is not known when their friendship began, but it was their shared interest for pre-Hispanic art and archaeology that pushed them to commit the crime. Maybe the money played a part, but it wasn't all. We don't know much about Ramon's family, but Carlos was well off. His dad was a renowned doctor. They had a nice house in the suburbs of Mexico City, with loving families and good educational opportunities. They didn't take advantage of those opportunities, though, rumor has it. Both Ramon and Carlos were failing behind in their classes at the university. By the evening of the 25th, all people could talk about was the robbery. Enrique, the director of the museum, had no other choice but to do a conference. He confessed that the museum had no alarm system in place. When asked why, he answered, "The security system we currently have has been efficient for 20 years. It has never failed us till now." Reporters were aghast. How could a museum of the size and value like the Anthropology Museum have no alarm system in place? Not even a dog to bark when someone tries to jump over the fence. Police sprang into action, alerted the airports, Interpol, blocked the borders, and assembled a team of detectives. This was no ordinary theft. It was a crime that needed solving quickly. The 80s had not been a good year for Mexico's government. The 8 security guards that had been working that night were arrested and questioned. The eye was on them. They had all colluded to not doing their duties that night. Could they also have helped the robbery, or could it have been something bigger? Experts in history and art linked the robbery with others that had been happening in the world. In museums like the Louvre in France, the Museum of Art in New York, or the Museum of History in Italy, they were experts. Investigators from Interpol agreed with the Mexican authorities. They chose only the oldest and most valuable relics. They took the jewels from the king of Palenque, jade, gold, emeralds, silver. They left no trace and made no mistakes. This was planned. The Mexican president at that time, Miguel de la Madrid, gave explicit orders for all police personnel in the country to be trained to look for the art. While all of this was happening, Carlos and Ramón was still in Carlos's room. I imagine they were scared at this point. They knew the historic value of the pieces, yes, that's why they stole them. But now they were being called international criminals, professional art dealers, anthropology experts, art experts, and so many things. But they were just a pair of dead students. Ramón was the most affected one. He only did it because Carlos asked him to do it. He hadn't even thought of committing a crime before. He suggested they find a way to give the relics back. Maybe if they went voluntarily, they could strike a deal or something. Carlos wouldn't hear him.
Are you crazy? All that effort and you want to give it back. Calm down, Ramoncho.
Ramoncho was the name Carlos used when he wanted Ramón to calm down.
You're only scared because everything's hot right now. Just stay quiet, at school, and with your family. No one can know. Don't say anything.
Okay, said Ramón.
But I'm scared. I don't want to go to jail. We won't. Just let me find a client. We'll sell the pieces and that's that. Why do we do this, Carlos? We don't even need the money. Your dad pays for everything. Mine does too. We don't need this. Yes, but do you want to show them? Do you want to show yourself how great you can be? They're saying we did the work of international criminals. Just you and me, we did that. I don't know. Imagine how the girls are gonna act when they see we got all the money. Don't be stupid. Use your head a little, Ramoncho. You know what? Just keep your mouth shut and I'll do everything. Trust me.
Ramón accepted. He had always been an easygoing person, kind of meek. That's why Carlos liked him so much. Their plan worked. The police had no choice but to let the security guards free. They had no part in the robbery and there was no clue about their participation, other than their lack of work, of course. With the years, 500 suspects were investigated and released, and the case slowly faded. 4 years later, a shadowy figure known as El Cabo emerged from the depths of a prison, claiming he knew the whereabouts of the stolen relics. The police struck a deal with him. If he helped them capture Carlos, they would fix him a lighter sentence. El Cabo told them about his time in Acapulco. There, El Cabo caught wind of a guy named Carlos who was trying to sell some historic treasures. Serrano was an American drug dealer who was also friends with El Cabo. He introduced him to Carlos back in 1988. Turns out, both Carlos and Ramón had traveled to Acapulco in 1986 in search of buyers. When they couldn't find a buyer, they became Serrano's clients and later his workers. They started traveling back and forth from Mexico City to Acapulco in search of buyers. One of Serrano's many girlfriends had a brothel that the three of them visited. She was known as Princess Jamal, a cabaret dancer who had been very famous in the past, when a type of very suggestive films were prominent in Mexico's cinemas. Carlos was divine, she said, very seductive. He wasn't handsome. He was actually kind of short, athletic looking, and a little bald. He was an educated man, very prepared. What Princess Jamal didn't know at the time was that that very interesting man she found with her boyfriend would put her into prison for years and years. After talking on the phone for some time, Carlos and El Cabo agreed to meet after the new year started. But El Cabo was captured on January 1st in Guadalajara. After El Cabo's confession, police planted spies in the prison, taped inmates' conversations, and helped El Cabo plan a deal with Carlos. After multiple phone calls, Carlos finally said the words they had been waiting to hear. He offered El Cabo a piece of the finest art in Mexico. Once they found Carlos, police stayed on his tail. But they had no real evidence, and the deal that El Cabo wanted was on the line. In a last effort, El Cabo asked Carlos to pay off his debt, with proof that he really had the pieces. Turns out he had been providing Carlos drugs every single week, and Carlos hadn't paid him. He agreed and sent El Cabo a pair of beautiful Mayan earrings. By April, El Cabo had tricked Carlos into going back to his parents' house in Mexico City because, according to him, police were investigating them back in Acapulco. Police set a perimeter around the house and kept following him everywhere for 2 months. Finally, 7 months after El Cabo started working with them, the police entered Carlos's parents' house. Inside, they discovered 111 relics. They were each wrapped in toilet paper and kept away in a sports bag and other suitcases in a closet. They were believed to be untouched since the night of the robbery. Along with Carlos, his brother Luis and 7 other people were arrested, including Princess Jamal and her boyfriend. According to Carlos, his partner in robbery, Ramón, kept 7 relics, while he himself exchanged 2 for drugs back in Acapulco. The last 4 pieces, though, have never been located. It's interesting that the original report back in 1985 said that only 120 pieces were stolen from the museum. Later, when they checked the records, they reported 4 additional pieces, making it 124 stolen relics. Is it possible that Carlos knew of this mistake and purposefully didn't mention the other 4 pieces? Or was the original report correct, and only 120 pieces were stolen? Another thing to consider is that the museum not only lacked a security system, but their books were unkept, meaning that no one knew exactly how many pieces were stolen in the end. Confessions of the people detained contradict each other. Some say there were 140 pieces in total, others say there were 120. In the end, Carlos confessed to being the mastermind and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. There he met a tragic fate when 10 years later he was killed by one of the inmates. Ramón has never been seen again.